right? Has anyone ever experienced something in life where you said, why me? Anybody? Anybody besides me? It's a few honest people here, absolutely. And usually it's something that's not very good, something that's not convenient, and you're like, oh my goodness, why me? Why me, God? Or why always me? Or why never me? I don't know if why is it so easy for her to lose weight and not me? Right? Why is it so easy for everyone else to quit smoking and not me? Why does it seem like everyone is getting ahead financially, but not me? Why is my car breaking down and not his? You ever go through that? Why do the Seahawks always lose and the Niners never do? Oh my goodness. So I just had to throw that in there. But anyway, we get in these why me's and why everything else. I remember this when I was putting this talk together. This memory popped in my mind. This girl back in high school. We were I don't know if I was a junior or senior. I can't remember. But we were sitting in the courtyard, a bunch of friends just hanging out, and it was after school. I think it was after school, hanging out, just kind of talking, chatting, having a good time. And this was back in the 80s, and so it was big hair. Okay, big hair, lots of hairspray, and so this girl was sitting there, and she had it was probably a good 8 inches or more, just up like that, and but it was in style, so no one made fun of her, or she was just big. But then, just out of nowhere, out of the sky was the biggest, gooeyest turd I had ever seen. Came flying and landed right on her hair. And it plopped down, it made the whole thing go down, and it plopped down onto her hand and onto her folders, and remember the peaches back then, all over. It was just nasty. And and I remember, here's what she goes, oh, this is the second time in 2 weeks, why me? And I'm thinking, yes, that's so awesome. Better you than me, but anyway, things happen, and I think we've all asked why. Why me? Why me, God? Funny things happen, strange things happen, but so do ugly things happen as well in life too. Why? Difficult things, horrible things, and we ask the question, why me? Why do bad things happen to good people? Of course, we all think we're good, right? And so, okay. But anyway, or I've been trying so hard, working my tail off for this. What's up with that? Why, God? Why did this happen? Yeah, I've been trying to honor God and do the right thing. Why do I keep coming up short? What's going on? Something has always seemed to falling apart. Why? Doesn't God see? Doesn't he hear? Isn't he aware? And these questions start going through our minds and sometimes driving us crazy depending on how often we go there. It's how can he be good and yet allow these things into my life? Where is he? I've been praying. I've been reading my Bible. I've been trying to get my life right. And now this happens. Is God real? Is he there? Has he abandoned me? Does he get some cruel pleasure out of watching me suffer? And we think about things, if we're honest. About 10 years ago, I was pastoring a church in Sisters, Oregon. And it was my first time pastoring, being in the lead role. I'd been there for about 2 years or so at this point, and was working hard, learning a lot, loving people, serving people, pouring my all and more into it. Well, around that time, we had already begun making plans to build a new building because we were doing kind of church out of the box. We were using a middle school and having church in there, and we had some property, and so we decided it's time, let's build a building. And so we went to the drawing board, and we put plans together. We hired an architect, we hired a contractor, and things were moving forward, full steam ahead, and it was great, a fantastic time. We put the shovels in the ground, we broke ground, and it was awesome. Well, at that time as well, something else was developing in our church with some people that had the potential to cause everything to come to a crashing halt, or in the worst case scenario, all but sink the church. And I was devastated. I felt betrayed, lied about, I was turned against, between that and the incredible financial pressure that was now staring me in the face because of this building that we had committed to build. I was beaten down. I was stressed beyond measure. I was scared and confused, angry, wondering where God was in all of this, the whole situation. Why would he let something like this happen? After all, I was working my tail off for him, right? Where was he? What's going on? Why did things happen this way? Why me, God? And it was one of the most painful times of my life. And, everything was on the line and just about to fall through the floor is how it felt. And we've all had times like this where life gets ugly. And questions fill our minds and our hearts, questions that we often neither know the answer to, nor do we know what to do with. And we wonder, what is going on? What is going on? And then to make it worse, some of us, especially those of us who've been around church long enough, may have heard things like this, don't question God, just grin and bear it, right? Or his ways are higher than ours, just have faith, just trust in him. And you're like, shut up, you're thinking those things go through your mind. Or God doesn't like to be questioned, so just take it like a champ. And I don't happen to agree with any of that. Okay, and this morning we're going to continue our series called When Life Gets Ugly. And the title of the talk today is Question God. Okay, question God. Not question authority, question God. And I believe that if there's anything that we should do when life gets ugly and it feels like we're getting hammered from every direction and we don't understand why, if there's anything that we should do, it's we need to take our hard and difficult questions directly to God. Okay, and here's why. Bottom line, Jesus did. He did. Jesus had spent about 3.5 years of intense ministry, intensely loving people, intensely serving people, healing people, doing crazy, impossible miracles, spending time with the hurting, the broken, the outcasts, and those, and those are the religious people called sinners. Okay, he was doing everything right, perfect obedience to God. He was walking the life. Things were getting done, and in a quick turn of events, something that he knew would happen, he predicted it. The world had turned against him. And it wasn't just that people were mad at him. It wasn't just that some people hated him. They went the whole way. He was arrested, falsely accused, lied about, betrayed by a follower, deserted by his best friends, mocked by the crowds, condemned to death. He was brutally beaten as his skin was ripped from his back and ripped to shreds by the whips of Roman soldiers. A crown of 3-inch thorns were shoved onto the top of his head. And then he was stripped naked and nailed to a cross with nails the size of railroad spikes through his hands and through his feet. And in the midst of the ugliness of the situation, Jesus cried out these words from the cross, words that a lot of people find shocking. I'll be on the screen. He said this. Jesus cried out with a loud shout, my God, why did you abandon me? And in some translations it says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you deserted me too? If there's ever a moment I need you, God, it's now. Why am I all alone up here? Why would you leave me now? It's a cry of intense emotional anguish that describes a sense of abandonment that Jesus felt at the worst possible time of his life. Why, God? Why'd you have to leave me? But why would Jesus ask such a question of God? Why would he ask that kind of question? Number one, it's hard to imagine Jesus asking a question that he didn't already know the answer to, because he's Jesus. Okay, why would he ask that question? But number two, isn't he God's son? And how is it possible for God to leave him? And there was something else going on besides the obvious physical and emotional pain that he was enduring on that ugly day. Now, you might be a spiritually curious person, and maybe all this is new to you, or maybe you've heard that Jesus died for our sins, but never quite made sense of it. Hopefully what I'm going to describe will help. But in addition to all the physical anguish that Jesus experienced, something else was happening. The writers of the Bible tell us that when Jesus hung on the cross, he was taking upon himself the weight and the consequences of every sin of every human being that has ever walked this planet, past, present, and future. Every sin, every act of moral failure that we do in life carries weight with it, doesn't it? I don't know if you're honest with me. You do something wrong. It could be as small as a lie or as big as a murder. When we do something wrong, we feel something. There's a weight that comes with it. It could be guilt. It could be shame. It could be embarrassment. It could be a breach of relationship. Something happens when we do something wrong. We know it, and there's something that we carry with us, and there's a weight that comes with it. And Jesus took upon himself the weight and the pain and the shame and the guilt of every sin ever committed. Every lie, every insensitive word spoken, every piece of gossip, every act of anger, every act of abuse, every rape, every murder, every abortion, every act of brutality, every act of sexual immorality, infidelity, child abuse, everything was placed onto his shoulders on that day. In fact, Paul describes what Jesus took for us with these words. It'll be on the screen. God made him, speaking of Christ, who had no sin, to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Jesus Christ, who never knew sin, he never experienced it. He never experienced the weight of it. Not only carried it, but became sin for us. It's huge. I don't know if you grasp that. It's huge. There's a transformation that took place. And what I'm about to tell you is a true story. I'm not making it up. Didn't get out of the air, Chris, so just so you know that. Anyway, so my brother, he's a missionary in the Philippines. And some of you know that. He's been there for about 7 years now, and he does all sorts of work there in serving the people. Sometimes it's minor medical work out in villages. Other times it's helping churches, or like lately it's been relief work in a village across one of the large islands there where they got hit by a hurricane. They were just devastated by a hurricane over there. And so he's been helping build things. Well, one day he was out in some village, and it was about a year or so ago. Maybe it was longer. I can't remember. But I remember we were talking on the phone, and he was serving the people just, out in the middle of nowhere. And suddenly he got the feeling that we all get during the day where, it's time to stop what we're doing, take a short break, and go to the bathroom, okay? And so he decides, okay, I'm just going to kind of do that. And so following his instincts, he walks over to the nearby outhouse, and he's in there getting ready to do his thing when he hears this crack, and suddenly he falls 6 or 7 feet through the floor into the outhouse pit, okay? And it wasn't a newly dug pit either, all right? It had been there for a long time. And he found himself just waist deep in stuff that wasn't his, okay? And, and we're thinking like, oh my gosh, that's nasty, and I'm like, dude, better you than me, And, we had a good laugh about it. But in that sense, that doesn't even come close to Jesus, who knew no sin, and he became that for us. He immersed himself for us on the cross when he took our shame, when he took everything, the penalty for what we've done, even far worse than what my brother experienced there. When Jesus became sin, he experienced for the first time in his eternal existence separation from the Father, complete separation, which happens to be, one of the eternal consequences for our sins is separation from God. And he experienced in that moment a tearing apart, a severing of relationship, a severing of perhaps nature. Why have you forsaken me, God? Questions don't get a whole lot harder than that. And Jesus aimed his tough questions at God. And when life gets ugly for you and for me, we need to aim our hard questions at God, just like Jesus did, okay? And not be afraid of it. So if you want to take some notes, we're going to go quickly through this, but take there's a green sheet in your handout there. Take your hard questions to God, okay? It doesn't matter what kind of question or how angry or hurt you might feel. take your hard questions to God just like Jesus did. Just like he did. All right, the first point here is God welcomes honest questions. You ever been in a classroom where a teacher says, no question's a stupid question, And of course, I'll find a stupid question, if I'm there. I'll do that just because I like to annoy people. And anyway, but God welcomes honest questions. He does. Even if we're angry at God for our circumstance, even if we're struggling and doubting him or his goodness, he welcomes you and your difficult questions. He is never going to say, well, that's a dumb question, dork. Get it together, man. He's never going to say that to us, okay? Now, there's a difference between being honest, asking an honest, heartfelt question. There's a difference between that and an all-around bad attitude where you're not really interested in finding an answer, okay? There's a difference. Jesus wasn't having a bad attitude, not looking for an answer, okay? I'm not talking about an antagonistic meathead who, doesn't really care. God welcomes honest questions. Why me? Why this? Why can't I hear your voice, God? Why do I feel like you're not around? Why do I feel like you have it out for me? Why haven't you made things easier? I've been trying so hard. How much more do I need to try? He welcomes those questions. He does. One of the heroes in the Bible, a guy named David, tough guy, sometimes a real stupid guy, like when he committed adultery and had a loyal friend killed in battle so that he could have his friend's wife. In case you're not familiar, maybe you've seen the VeggieTales rated G version. He was after the rubber ducky, So anyway, but however you want to look at it, sometimes he wasn't very smart. But in spite of all that, the Bible refers to David as a man after God's own heart. And if you were to read the many things that David wrote, especially in the Psalms, he was constantly taking hard, honest questions to God. Psalm 22, he says this. Sounds familiar. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? So far from the words of my groaning. Oh my God, I cry out by day, but you don't answer. By night, and am I not silent? I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax. It has melted away within me. God welcomes questions like that. He welcomes people who have questions. And if there's anyone in existence who can handle them and not freak out, it's God. Sometimes people bring me those kinds of questions, and I'm like, ask God. Just because, it's like, I don't know. I wish I had an answer. God does. Next point is God can handle your emotions. Maybe your wife or a husband or parents or kids can't handle your crazy emotions, but God definitely can. There are times when Wendy is going through something really tough and she's like freaking out and getting all emotional, and I'm like, what's gotten into you? I know I can't fix her. I've tried that before and failed, and so I can't go there, right? Or the times when I'll hear one of my little girls just shriek out, scream at the top of their lungs. It sounds like they're getting knifed to death, and it's not stopping. I'm like, what is going on? I start, oh my goodness. I go up and they saw a little baby spider on the wall in the bathroom, and I'm thinking, really? And, just sometimes it's just hard to handle the craziness. But if there's anyone who can handle our emotions and our questions, it's God. Even if the emotion is extreme, even if we're angry at God or depressed or we're hopeless or we're fearful or frantic, he can handle those things. In fact, if there's anyone to be angry at, well, be careful, but he can handle it when we're angry. Be honest. Okay? It's better to be honest than to lie about something. Next point here is your cry will never fall on deaf ears. God welcomes tears in his presence. He draws near to those who are hurting, and he will never turn a deaf ear or ignore us. Scripture describes time and time again a God who is compassionate, a God who listens, a God who's near, a God who comforts, a God who allows complaints because he alone is able to meet needs. Writer of the Psalms, David, he says this, I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. I pour out my complaint before him. And another passage says, evening, morning, and noon, I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice. I know I'm not a perfect dad. Actually, a real idiot sometimes, especially when I have a hard time showing compassion to some of my kids, with handling of their emotions. But I will never turn a deaf ear to them when they're in need, when they're hurting, when they're scared. Sometimes, especially when he isn't around, sometimes I'm all they've got. And I'm never going to turn a deaf ear to them. And if someone as imperfect as me will never turn a deaf ear to my kids, how much more God will not turn a deaf ear to us. And so, next point, Jesus understands your pain. He was there. He knows what life gets like when life is ugly. He knows what it feels like to be alone, to be abandoned. He's been there. A number of years ago, I had some serious lower back problems, and they were terrible. They were excruciating. I was diagnosed with degenerative joint disease, I think. Some of you guys have heard that, know that. And I had 3 bulging discs in my lower back. I remember one day when I had to drive myself to the specialist's office, and I could barely get out of the car and walk in. It was like I was 80 or 90 years old. I mean, seriously. And I walk in there, and I register, and I had to go to my seat, and I'm sitting down. They called my name. I couldn't get out of the seat. I mean, it was that bad. And someone had to help me out of the seat and walk me into the doctor's office. I'm a 30-something-year-old, and I'm thinking, oh, my goodness. And I'm in there just hurting, and I'm just begging the doctor. I said, please, surgery. I mean, I don't care don't take an x-ray. Just put me under a knife. It hurts that bad. And she looked at my MRI, looked at the x-rays, and she goes, nope, not bad enough. I'm like, what? I can't believe it. But with that, anytime I come across someone who has back pain, guess what? I understand their pain. My heart is moved. I will pray for them, and I will pray for them, and continue to pray for them until something changes. Because and in the same way, Jesus knows our pain. God isn't up in heaven, completely out of touch, with us like some self-centered politician. He understands us, and he understands our pain because he's been there. Another reason to bring our tough questions to God is human answers don't always satisfy. A couple years ago, when you remember when the tsunami hit Japan? And I mean, it just wiped things out, the big old earthquake. And a lot of people asking questions, of course. A lot of people died, homes destroyed, the whole thing. I still remember watching videos online. You can still go online and see them. But I remember one person in the news or something, or was talking about what somebody, I can't remember who was saying, well, because people are looking for answers, right? Well, the earth is just recycling itself. And people are like, oh, yeah. Get a brain. If it's recycling itself, it sure did a pretty bad job because it took salt water and it wiped everything out, great farmland, and it made it nothing. Yeah, that's good recycling. Well done. Good thinking. But people are looking for answers, and sometimes human answers don't always satisfy, right? Even good ones. Okay, that was not a good one. But in the darkest of hours, in the ugliest times of life, there are times when no human being can give us an adequate answer to the questions that we have. It just happens that way. Friends may analyze, counselors may sympathize, family may empathize, but sometimes that's not what we need or what we're looking for. Intelligent answers sound good and reasonable, and the comfort of friends is appreciated, but it's like trying to feed your hunger with binder paper. It just doesn't quite work, right? And, it doesn't quite satisfy, because what we're longing for is God himself, his presence in the moment, not answers. Answers are important, but they don't always satisfy. The Barna Group did a study in a national poll and asked this question. If you could ask God one and only one question, and you knew that he would give you an answer, what would you ask him? And the top response that was given is, why is there pain and suffering in the world? That was a top response in that big, huge study. And this is a deeply personal issue. to people. And I think it's reflective of our human nature that not only desires not to suffer, but also somehow believes that some suffering is somehow wrong, somehow unnatural to life, that there should be better in life. And so because we don't like to suffer, laws, of course, are made in order to protect or prevent suffering. We have all kinds of laws, seatbelt laws, whatever it is, drinking laws, all that. People feel entitled not to suffer. Many fear suffering. What if I get sick? What if I get mugged? What if I lose a loved one? What if Winco runs out of food? What if a big hairy spider crawls up my nose? All these things. What if my dad embarrasses me in front of my friends? And we have these questions, and sometimes that's pain and suffering. But there are spiritual and biblical answers to those questions that are both true and make sense. Okay, now we can look at the fact that part of the reason pain and suffering exists in this world is because God gave humanity a very precious gift called free will. All right? Free will. He gives the power to choose, to make moral choices. It's part of God's image that is stamped into every one of us. We have that free will to choose. Inherent in that gift of free will is the possibility of evil, the possibility of doing wrong, to sin. The consequences of that evil or that sin is pain and suffering, okay? It's not logically possible to have free will and no possibility of moral evil. In other words, once God chose to create human beings with free will, then it was up to them, rather than God, as to whether there would be sin or not. And that's what free will means. That's what it's about, okay? So when Adam and Eve ate the fruit, and there was nothing wrong with the fruit, it wasn't like poisonous, okay? It was just the act of choosing something different, okay? They had a moral choice there. Sin and evil and the resulting sickness and suffering entered into our world. We can understand that intellectually. We can understand that one reason God doesn't intervene more is because to intervene may be to rob somebody of their free will, and God won't do that. If he did, we wouldn't be human anymore. We would be little more than computers or robots. True, there would be no more hate, no more violence, no more sin, no more suffering, but there would also be no more love, which is the highest of good that can be experienced. And real love, our love for God, our love for each other, must involve something called choice, free will. Otherwise, it's not real love, okay? And we can understand all that. And sometimes it helps. But when we're actually going through some of life's ugliness, those answers many times don't satisfy because the pain is personal. The pain hits here. And we can know those answers, but not be satisfied, even though they're true. It's not an answer, especially a human one, that'll satisfy. It's only God's presence that will. God wants us to seek him. And sometimes it's the ugliness of life that's the only thing that will move us in his direction. He wants us to experience his voice, his presence, a supernatural touch from him. That's the only thing that will satisfy. And so we bring our questions and we bring our pain to God because it's really him that we desire. Following? The last point here of why? Because God will always answer. He will always answer. It may take time, sometimes even a long time, but he will answer. In some way, shape, or fashion, God will answer the tough questions. And here's one more thing that he'll do. I love this poem. Most of us probably have heard it. Some of us might have it hanging in our bathroom somewhere. But in case it's been a long time since you've heard this, I'll read it. One night I dreamed that I was walking along the beach with the Lord. Many scenes from my life flashed across the sky. In each scene, I noticed footprints in the sand. Sometimes there were 2 sets of footprints. Other times there were just one. This bothered me because I noticed that during the low periods of my life when I was suffering from anguish, sorrow, or defeat, I could only see 1 set of footprints. So I said to the Lord, you promised me, Lord, that if I would follow you, You would walk with me always. But I noticed that during the most trying periods of my life, there have been only one set of footprints in the sand. Why, when I needed you most, were you not there for me? And the Lord replied, the times when you have only seen one set of footprints were the times that I carried you. That's why we bring things to God, because he carries us. He will always answer. God will give us an answer, and it will always be in our best interest. Most importantly, he will carry us through those difficult times. It's my challenge today. You know, that this series is when life gets ugly. Last week we looked at forgive everyone who's trying to ruin your life, just like Jesus did, okay, when he was hanging on the cross. But in today's challenge, and listening to Jesus' words on the cross, is take your hard questions to God. Whatever you're facing in life, maybe it's something that you're going through right now. Maybe there's some past hurts that you don't know how to deal with, and so you've buried them, but you haven't taken them to God. Maybe it's something that will take place in the future. Take your tough questions to God. No matter how tough or emotional, no matter how often. I think we don't go to God directly enough. I think we don't. I've heard from many people things like this. Well, I don't take my stuff to God because he's got enough on his plate. He has more important things to deal with. I can handle it. I'm like, you sinking serious? You're basically saying that you're stronger and more capable than God is when you pray that. And there are actually, I've run into a lot of people who pray or don't pray because thinking that way. It's like, no, drop your stuff and take it to God. We need to do that. We need to get that habit, even before, things get ugly. But there's no one who can handle our stuff better than he can, so don't be afraid. God isn't. He isn't afraid of our stuff. And he desires us to come to him, even if it shakes our faith a bit. You don't have to be eloquent with your prayers. You don't even have to know how to pray. Just do as Jesus did on the cross. Raise your voice and sincerely and honestly take it to him and say, God, why? And mean it. And be intentional about it. He will meet you. What could our lives be like? How could the ugliness that we face in life be resolved quicker and healing more complete if we would just take our stuff to God more often? Let's stand. God in heaven, you are good. In fact, I'm reminded of a question that is posed. So often we think, how can God be good when there's so much evil in the world? But on the flip side, on the better side, how could there be so much good in the world if there wasn't a God? And God, you are good, and you allow us to experience so much goodness here. But there's often times when things get ugly in our lives. It could be relationships. It could be financial hardship. It could be failures of morally. It could be a whole lot of different things. And so often, God, we feel alone. We don't know why it's happening. God, I pray for any person that's here today that you would, just by your Spirit, come alongside and help us to take our tough questions to you. Just to lay it out before you. Just as Jesus did. He had nothing to hide. He had nothing but he was just raw up there on that cross. And that's what came out of his mouth because that's what was in his heart. God, may we have a relationship with you that's like that. That we can just be raw before you. That we can just take our stuff, the good, the bad, the ugly, the questions, and bring it before you. And God, I pray that as we do that we would sense your presence, that we would hear your voice, whether we haven't get an answer directly or quickly or not. May we sense and know that you're there and that you're going to take care of us and you're going to walk through it with us. So God, I just pray for anyone here today who's going through something. God, that you would just meet them as they call out to you. Thank you for this day. Thank you for this season and leading up to Easter. And I pray that you would draw us nearer to yourself as we just look at these things that Jesus mentioned from the cross when he hung there, that we may learn how to deal with the ugliness of our lives by watching and looking at what Jesus did with his. So thank you, God. I pray you bless each person and their week. Bring us back next week. And may we have just an incredible time serving the community next Saturday. And may there be lots of people who will come to faith in Jesus